sous. We'll have bank full of francs, quids, bucks, in truckloads, cash. Can't you hear that jingle jangle sound? Oh yeah. It's money, money, money by the money, money, money by the pound.
Let us talk about money. Specifically, the various coins that are mentioned in the New Testament. Now, I know most of these coins are mentioned in the Gospels, and we've already gone past that in our reading, but I thought it would be interesting to take a quick look. Now, in the Roman Empire, the Romans frequently allowed local governments to continue operating and minting their own coins. So the Greeks would still have their drachmas, the Jews would still have their shekels, and so on. To pay tribute to Rome, however, it had to be paid in Roman coins, and the Roman coins began to circulate throughout the empire. This led to many people, or many Jews, from other parts of the empire, when they would come to Jerusalem for the Passover, they would bring with them money to buy animals for the sacrifices. This money, most often, was Roman coins. The most common of the Roman coins being the Roman denarius. And the money changers, that was a business of exchanging the money, because when you went to the temple, they only accepted the local coin of the shekel. So when you brought your Roman denarius to the temple to buy an animal, you had to go to the money changers and exchange your denarius for shekels. And the money changers would make their money, make their profit, by giving you somewhat less in value than what you're giving them. So if you brought in 100 denarius, they would give you an equivalent of about 90 shekels. This is what was going on in the temple the two times that we read about Christ cleansing the temple and chasing the money changers out, flinging the tables of the money changers. It was a dishonest practice in that the people selling the animals would only accept the shekel, forcing the foreign Jews to make the exchange of the money and thus give the money to the money changers. The money changers had begun to require an exorbitant percentage. So now, if you brought in your 100 denarius, you would normally get the equivalent in shekels of 90 denarius, which would be around 22 to 25 shekels. But they started charging more, so you'd only get 80%. And so you'd only get 20 shekels instead of the 23 you would normally get. And this was why he called them a den of thieves. This is the economy that's going on in the New Testament. A lot of these coins were still valued on weight. So a shekel, being 4 times the weight of a denarius, would be worth 4 times what a denarius was worth. However, the metal content was not always uniform. So a tetradrachma was considered to be 4 denarius, but its silver content was only at about 70 to 80%, while the shekel, also worth 4 denarius, had a silver content of around 95%. This would eventually lead to devaluing some coins and causing inflation and causing all kinds of messes. But that's the way it was going on. And the Romans tried to set the standards, and this is what it's worth. But because of the metal content, occasionally you would have coins that were worth more in pure metal than they were in face value. So that's the basics of how the economy was working at the time. Very basic. There's much more detail in there, but just wanted to give a basic idea.
Can't you hear that jingle jangle sound? Oh, yeah.
Now let's talk about some of the individual coins that are mentioned in the New Testament. We've mentioned the denarius, or the denarii. Denarii, I believe, is how you pronounce the plural. The denarius is one, the denarii is multiple. This was your basic standard coin of the Roman Empire. And 1 denarius was a day's wages for a common soldier or a laborer. That would be about what you would pay a person for a single day's work. Now, the denarius was valued as 10 times an assis, or assarion. I've seen it spelt both ways. And then another coin, a little lower than that, actually, the lowest Roman coin, the smallest Roman coin, was the Quadran. And they were worth 1/4 of an assis, or assarion. Now, of course, that was the original minting. By the time of the New Testament, the Asarion is worth only 1/16 of the denarius due to inflation. Now, the Quadran remains 1/4 of the Asarion, and so it becomes 1/64 of a denarius. Now, in the New Testament, the denarius is what is most commonly translated as the penny. So when they ask about paying tribute to Caesar and he says, "Show me a penny," he's talking about a denarius. When he talks about in his parables, the laborers in the vineyard, they each get paid a penny at the end of the day. They're each getting paid a denarius because that is 1 day's labor. Now we also have the story of Judas complaining about Mary anointing Christ's feet with the ointment from the alabaster box. He says it can be sold for 300 pence. That would be 300 pennies or 300 denarii. And that would mean almost, fairly close anyways, about 85% of 1 year's wages for your average worker or soldier.
Crowns. Suits.
Now, other coins of the time, there are many other coins of the time. The other two that are specifically mentioned, as far as we can tell, is first of all, you have the Tyrian Shekel. This is an interesting coin in that it was first minted in Tyre, the coastal city. This is the one that had a 95% silver content and maintained that throughout all the time that it was minted. Most coins, when values would shift and you'd have inflation and deflation, all that, then they would change how much silver content was in the coin. The Tyrian Shekel always remained the same. Now, they didn't have the technology to make it exactly the same, so it ranged between 93% and 97%, with an average at about 95%. Now, sometime before the New Testament, I wasn't able to figure out exactly when, but Rome outlawed Tyrus, or the city of Tyre, from minting these coins anymore. When they did this, however, they gave the Jews the right to mint it. So it was probably after the birth of Christ, but before the main ministry of Christ. Tyre is no longer allowed to mint it, but the Jews are given the right to mint it on the condition that they don't change anything. Meaning they had to mint it with the same silver content and they had to use the same insignia. They had to use the same imprint. That way it still looked like a Tyrian shekel, because they didn't want people to think that the Jews were getting any independence. And so the Jews were allowed to mint it as long as it still looked like a Tyrian shekel. Now, according to the law of Moses, the shekel of the sanctuary is what the standard was for judging the value of anything in the Jewish law, under the law of Moses. And so the Tyrian shekel, at this time, takes the place of the shekel of the sanctuary, or the old measurements, and becomes the standard. And so when Peter is asked about paying tribute money, and Christ tells him to go catch a fish, and they find a coin in the mouth of the fish, and use that to pay the tribute, this is the temple tribute. I think when I was reading this, I said it was tribute to Rome, and I was wrong. This is the temple tribute, the tribute or the tithe that you had to pay to the temple. And therefore, it would have been paid in Tyrian shekels, because that was the standard currency of the law of Moses. And so it would have been a Tyrian shekel that Peter found in the mouth of the fish. Comparing these two, the Tyrian shekel was, in general, worth about 4 denarii. So it would have been 4 days' wages.
Quids. Butts.
Now, there are other coins. As I mentioned, the Tetradrachm, this is a Greek coin, a Greek silver coin, and it was worth 4 Greek drachma. But the drachma were not in general circulation anymore. They were still used somewhat in Greece, but they didn't make it outside of Greece in general. But the Tetradrachm did, because it was a much larger coin, and so you could print bigger and more detailed images on it, and it was used for some propaganda. You might print the Tetradrachm to announce a victory in battle, so you have a special minting that would announce a great victory of this leader. You might have, when a new emperor came into power, he'd have new Tetradrachmas minted with his image on it to announce his coronation, those kind of things, because it was a larger coin and could be used in this way. The Tetradrachma, in general, was the same value as the Tyrian shekel, and the Tyrian shekel is sometimes called the Tetradrachma of Tyre. But because the silver content in the Tyrian shekel never changed, the value of it relative to the other coins changed over the years.
We'll have bank full of francs.
Now the last two coins I think I've already talked about the Quadran. This was the lowest denomination of Roman coin. It was made out of brass. It was not silver or copper or anything else. It was a brass coin. And this is most commonly translated in the New Testament as the farthing. The other small coin would be the mite in the New Testament. This is translated from the Greek lepton. And the lepton was the smallest denomination of Greek coin during the time of the New Testament. It's actually still, from what I understand, the smallest denomination of the euro used in Greece. It was the smallest denomination of the Greek currency all the way up to the modern day. It means basically smallest. I think it actually translates to little coin or something like that. Now, according to the New Testament, 2 mites make a farthing. And if we translate this back into the ancient coins, it would be 2 leptons make a quadran. So you see that the lepton is less valuable than the quadran. Now, it wasn't exactly 2 leptons to a quadran. It was actually, I think it was 1 lepton equaled 5/8 of a quadran. So 2 leptons would be slightly more than a farthing. But it was something like that. Now the last coin we need to talk about is the stater. This is another Greek coin. Originally, back in the Greek city-states, it was a measurement of weight. And so you would print ingots, silver ingots, and they were staters. That was how much they weighed. By the time of the New Testament, they are minting them into coins. And a stater is half the value of a tetradrachm. So a tetradrachm being 4 denarii, a stater is equal to 2 denarii. It is believed, generally, that the money, the 30 pieces of silver that the high priest paid Judas for betraying Christ was staters. Some people do believe they were shekels, but the most common opinion that I can find is that they were staters. 30 staters would then be equal to 60 denarii, or approximately 2 months' wages. Not a whole lot, really.
Can't you hear that jingle jangle sound? Oh, yeah.
So what are the coins we have here? The Roman coins mentioned in the New Testament are the denarius, which is translated as penny, and was the standard unit of pay in the Roman Empire. 1 denarius, 1 day's wage. The only other Roman coin mentioned is the farthing, or what would be called the quadran, translated as farthing. This was equal to approximately 1/64th of a denarius, and is the smallest Roman coin of the time. There are Greek coins also mentioned. We have at least the mite, which is the smallest Greek coin and is slightly less valuable than the quadran or farthing. We have a possible reference to the Tetradrachm of Greece. More likely, though, it is a reference to the Tyrian Shekel. We also have the Greek stater. So the stater being half the price or half the value of a tetradrachm or shekel. Those are the coins that are mentioned. So just briefly, why are we translating these as pennies, farthings, and mites? Or just pieces of silver? The simple answer to this is that the words being translated are the coins of the British nation at the time that the King James Bible was written in 1611. The mite is, from what I can gather, a Dutch coin of extremely low value. The farthing was the smallest British coin, being equal to 1/4 of a penny. Now the penny was the standard British coin, and then you'd get shillings and pounds. But because the penny was the standard, that was the base of the British coin system, that is what the denarius is translated into. The quadran is translated into the farthing because the quadran is the smallest denomination of Roman coin, and the farthing is the smallest denomination of British coin. The mite is used to translate the lepton because the lepton is of less value than the quadran, and the mite, being a Dutch coin, was less value than the farthing. But why then is the stater, or the shekels, being translated as just 30 pieces of silver? I haven't studied the Greek, so maybe the Greeks actually name a coin, but I don't think so. I think Luke actually just states 30 pieces of silver, and others state it that way because it is referencing back to Joseph being sold into Egypt for 20 pieces of silver. And so they wanted to make that connection there. This is the coinage that we read about in the New Testament. I think by understanding somewhat their economy, we understand the parables of Christ and the events a little bit better.
Crowns, suits. We'll have banks full of francs, quids, butts, in truckloads, cash, stocks, bonds, biggest shares, millionaires, marks, yens, in tens and twenties. Cash. Can't you hear that jingle jangle sound? Oh yeah. It's money, money, money by the money, money, money by the pound. Money by the money, money, money by the pound. Money, money, money by the money, money, money by the pound.